It feels like my volume's just a little bit low, but it is what it is. Check, check, check. Okay. Raise my volume. Do I sound like extra loud now?
No, you were a tad low. Now you're good.
Okay, cool. So we are actually live right now. Yo, check it out. It's your boy DJL7. As you know, I'm interviewing cats from all over the nation. Now today, I have another candidate with me. I'm quite excited, but I'm gonna let him introduce himself. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Elf. My name's Paul King. I live in Rockaway, Queens, which is the southern border part of Queens, and I'm running for the United States Congress against Gregory Meeks, 24-year incumbent.
Okay. So tell me, what got you first involved in politics? Was something that you felt need changing, and when was that?
Well, I've always tried to stay up on both the local and the national scene, but I've never wanted to get into the dirty game. I've stayed active in stuff in my neighborhood in Rockaway. So I'm on the community board. I'm president of my civic. I've always been involved in youth sports. But when you get a little older, you start looking backwards and you start realizing things going in the wrong direction too much. We're too divided and you don't solve problems, and regular people's lives just get worse, even if more well-to-do people keep getting better, because you don't solve the problems the right way. That's what I do for a living. I'm a consultant who solves problems. And I feel like the last couple of years, especially with the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, things are just getting so bad for the next generation or for working class people today that the American dream I grew up with isn't going to be available to them and to my grandchildren. So my wife and I said, either do something about it. So many people are like, why don't we move somewhere else? I'm like, I'm not going to flee. I'm going to fight. So I'm going in and I'm taking on the biggest cat in Queens, but it's important enough. I don't care, what happens in the end, but I'm putting in a good fight.
Okay. There's a lot of different cats out there with a lot of different backgrounds. I think one thing that can help us to distinguish one candidate from another is just seeing their accomplishments, right? So, some people say, what are you most proud of? They'll say, my kids. I say, that's a nice answer, but really gives the answer that's more relevant towards governance, right? So, what achievement are you most proud of accomplishing?
Okay. Well, I was going to go with my kids, even though that sounds trite.
I understand that, but and I
no,
get
no,
that, right? But from
yeah.
the issue of governance, right, or maybe the leadership, what's relevant there is to accomplish.
Well, and I think I can thank my father for this because he was always active in civics. And one of the things he taught me is, we in the different neighborhoods, we have people with, can have different cultures, different incomes, different ethnicities, but if we work together, we solve problems together. So, and it's hard to just pin it on just one thing, but, I worked with the Rockaway Little League, for instance. So that's neighborhoods all across the peninsula. And they asked me to be on point with the federal government. We have to deal with the federal government to have to use their facilities. We're probably the only Little League in the country that's on federal land. And, they wanted to charge, tens of thousands of dollars to have our kids play ball, which just would have put us out of business. But, being able to partner with other people in the neighborhood to stand up for, a big government action that was just going to hurt people. And at the end of the day, that first lease, they brought it down to $100. So we got our kids playing ball, which is so important, not just for entertainment. I'm a true believer that in sports, if you're coaching right, you're teaching kids life lessons about winning and losing. And I've done that for decades. But the added feature here is just working together with people from different parts of the communities for the common good.
All right. So the thing is that some people when they have like their political they'll have a political ideology or something like that. Do you have any particular framework that your politics comes from?
Yeah, it's pretty old school, which some people wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. But I refer to myself as a Reagan Kemp Republican, which is from way back. And what I liked about President Reagan, who was the first president of my adulthood, was he used to talk about America and the shining city on the hill. Not that we were this perfect image, but we are aspiring to be the shining city on the hill. So you need to have a vision of things being better. Too many people just focus on the negative, and they tell our young folks, things can't get any better. You're just screwed, and you need to be dependent upon my programs. And we'll take care of you, but you'll never have an outstanding life. I think the country and us as families and individuals should always be saying, hey, I want better. I want to do more with my life. And I like that inspirational approach. It helped us because the 70s were an ugly time. That's when I grew up. And the 80s was a revival. And there was a congressman, Jack Kemp, during that time. He was from Buffalo. who actually had been a professional football player for in the old AFL. And I think because he'd worked with people and, from different backgrounds, from all over the country, people, his play, the players on a football team were diverse. Uh, Even though he was, like a markets guy and, kind of a traditional Republican thing when it came to capitalism, he understood that there are some people in some parts of the country, in some situations, where they're not at the starting line. They're 3 steps back. And we can't just be like, oh, the market will take care of it, because those people will never get a chance. And that's what we have in parts of my district, parts of here in Rockaway and in Southern Queens, where the kids consistently get a bad education, or they're living in unsafe conditions, and there's no job opportunities. We build more, low income housing here, but we don't bring in any employers or good transportation. So a guy like Kemp said, hey, we need to fix those things to make sure everyone's at the starting line. I believe in markets, but we need to, if this is a fair country, everyone's got to be at the starting line, at least reasonably close.
Well, I was at Far Rockaway recently, and I've been like in all parts of the city. I've been in Newark. I haven't been Chicago, right? And the parts of Far Rockaway are quite rugged. I was surprised. You look at the police report; it looks like it's a pretty safe neighborhood. But I was like, whoa, stuff is it's really real out here.
Yeah, I went to a shooting response in Redfern houses, which is all the way at the end of
Yeah, I
Rockaway,
was at Redfern. Yeah.
and I was there, and for two young folks who got shot, and I realized it wasn't even the shooting response that I thought I was going to. There were 2 other people shot. It was like a weekend where we had 7 people shot, and I was like, they're just one on top of another during the summer. It was a real rough stretch, and this peninsula that I live on is a really good, almost metaphor in some ways for America. When I moved here 50 years ago, my parents bought a house for $40,000. My dad had 3 jobs. He worked in grocery stores, blue collar. My part of town was just blue collar, but everyone just struggling to get by. This was their first house. This was, part of their American dream. My neighborhood, the Bell Harbor, now the homes are way more expensive, and it's actually some of us are struggling to stay in the neighborhood. That's not necessarily a good thing, but overall, if you looked at pictures from 50 years ago now, you're like, wow, this neighborhood's improved, and there's so many, much better about quality of life. You just go a few miles away, and some neighborhoods have improved half as much. Some neighborhoods have barely improved. I mean, I wouldn't compare Far Rockaway in the 70s to Far Rockaway today, because they were much rougher then. But we still have these problems that persist in some areas of our country, in this case of our peninsula, and people in government don't know how to solve the problem. They throw money at it and say, hey, look, I spent billions. I don't understand why we still have gun violence or bad education. So I want to get in there and fix that.
So how are you going to be the difference? What's your plan?
Well, just first off, my skill set is solving problems by doing something we call systems thinking. So people always rail against the system, right? The system sucks, it's unfair, it's broken. People are right, but the vast majority of people don't really have any experience fixing systems. That's what I do for a living. My company's done for a living for close to 30 years. So if there's, metaphorically, if there's a fire, someone in government says, okay, let's spend millions of dollars putting out that fire, which you have to do. Obviously, if someone's bleeding, another metaphor, you have to give them a Band-Aid. But we don't want to give people a lifetime supply of Band-Aids. You want to figure out, why did that fire crop up? So in the case of gun violence, sure, we need to fix some of the policing, because we've gutted it so much that in the precinct in Far Rock, they're down 50 officers. They can't even do their jobs. But we also need to get the illegal guns out of everyone's hands. It's just too easy for people to have a gun. So those are like short-term Band-Aids that we need to work on. But long-term, it's, if some young guy just got in a position where he's pulling a trigger, that the gun, that gun in his hand didn't do it. It's like, what are all the factors upstream? Whether it was education, whether it was not having good mentors, or broken family, not having good examples to help him find the right path, or if he got on the wrong path, have someone to say, hey, you're messing up, here's what, let's work together.
So maybe a more holistic solution, right? That sounds good.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
so I actually have a bunch of political partners that I work with. I'm going to ask about their issues first. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to ask about is Assange. How do you feel about freeing Assange?
How do I feel about massage?
No, Assange. Assange. You heard of a guy named Assange? He was WikiLeaks.
Julian Assange, the guy from
Assange, exactly.
Oh, I haven't thought about him in years.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings. I mean, I think that um, in general, transparency is better than having state secrets all over the place. Um, I think where he ran well. That whole incident, what troubled me is if you're working for the Department of Defense and you see something that you think is un-American, bringing it to a foreigner and putting it out there is not necessarily the best answer. It's like after 9/11, for instance, which impacted people here in Rockaway quite a bit, all over New York. The government was pushing the boundaries of what it should do with the telephone monitoring, supposedly only monitoring foreigners, and they were effectively monitoring Al Qaeda's phones without them knowing about it. So if you're troubled about where the boundary is, there's got to be better ways in some like a case like that than telling the bad guys, by the way, the U.S. government's monitoring your phones, because then we lost track of terrorists. So I think there are certain cases where it troubles me if you just think everything should be wide open. But in general, I would like more transparency than less, because there's a lot of BS that, I was naive and optimistic growing up, and I still am in some ways, even at my age. But you get burned by that.
Okay. Well, that's fair. The thing is just, I don't want to push the issue too much, really, but just to know, just so you know, actually, I think that he just published information that was given to him by Chelsea Manning. I think that's what we liked it, but he did it several times. But also, a lot of other news publications, like New York Times, were also publishing the information too. But he was, I guess, singled out for some reason. Not really sure why. But that's fair. Everybody has their own take on it. But I am supporting Renaissance stuff. But it is what it is. Let's move on to the next one. What about UBI? Would you support UBI? Not supporting UBI. How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, we'll make sure we're talking about the same thing. UBI.
Universal basic income.
Okay. Um, I'm in favor. Actually, no, I'm not.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
think
That's fine.
that I'm much more targeted as a kind of like as a systems thinker. My training and my experience tells me if you have a system that doesn't work right and you've got broken levers, if you pour money on it, it tends to, at the end of the day, flow back to the people who the system advantage gives advantage to. So in the short term, it feels good, but if it doesn't help people stand on their own and work in the system or fix the system, then it becomes
I
almost
agree. I
self-defeating in
agree
the
with
long
it.
run.
That's an intelligent answer. I appreciate that. Right? Yeah. A lot of programs they say that are for us end up getting weaponized against us, and that's a very intelligent way to address that issue. Let's take a look at the next one over here. So the thing is that another group that works with people with disabilities, and the thing is that people with disabilities right now are allowed to be paid sub-minimum wage. Now, I understand that maybe people with disabilities may have productivity issues, right, where they may not be productive in certain ways. But the thing is that maybe could federally subsidize, right, or maybe somehow. But if we look at minimum wage, it's almost like a subsistence wage, and the people that are disabled, it's not really by any fault of their own. Would you support at least minimum wage for somehow, right, for these people that are having disabilities?
Yeah, I'm more into your minimum wage than your typical Republican. On one hand, when people say, "Oh, well, the minimum wage, it should be a living wage," it doesn't matter if it's $15 or $16 or $12 or 20. It's minimum wage is never really a living wage, but it needs to be at least keep up with what the minimum was in the past. And I think what you can make the case, and I know I'm not on the point of people with disabilities, but this is just some of my thoughts about minimum wage. That so when I worked in supermarkets when I was a kid, I could live with a lot lower minimum wage, and I think that it's important to get that experience when you're a teenager to start working. So I can live with a smaller minimum wage, but once you're working, once you're an adult, whether you're disabled or not, you need to be getting more compensation. And I don't think as sensitive as I am to inflation, and I'm angry about the inflation we have, I don't think inching up the minimum wage for certain audiences is going to be a big driver of inflation. So, but I had never heard your idea before, but I kind of like it, and I guess I'd like to learn more about it, specifically about people who are disabled.
That's one of the reasons why I do what we do. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, there's so many issues out there, by the way, right? So it's impossible for us to cover all of them. The next group that I work with is actually the trans community. And the thing is that we look at people who are trans, we know that they face a lot of discrimination in their daily life, might be hard to hold a job, and I get it, right? They're kind of like sticking out a lot, right? So the thing is that they often find themselves needing like public housing, right? Because they're going to be very poor, destitute. So let's put up a little example right here. Let's suppose that 10%, I'm just making the numbers up, right? Let's suppose that 10% of people applying for public housing are trans, but after we do some research, we find out that only 1% of the people that are applying for that are actually in public housing are trans. We see some type of disparity. So we go to ask their community, right, what's going on? Why do you think this is happening? They say that we're being discriminated against, right? They're getting beat up. They feel like leaving. So there's no law that says that you're allowed to discriminate against trans people, right? In fact, there's probably laws that say that we shouldn't, right? But do you see this happening? What can you do to get this community fair access to public resources in this hypothetical case?
Okay. Well, a couple of different things. I think you're right. There's it's if even if there's not a specific law that says that's illegal, I still think that the 14th Amendment covers all different flavors of people. We're supposed to all have equal rights under the law. And I like the way you posed it. You said, okay, it seems like there's a problem here. We didn't jump from A to discrimination. You want to look at it first because it's always better to have the facts, even if it seems obvious on the surface. So since you don't necessarily need to write a new law, I think what you need to do is speak out publicly. Hey, this is an issue and it's not fair, because I think Americans generally are fair, even if they come into something with prejudice. A lot of times prejudices melt away and people almost forget they had them, when they get older. But because it's probably more of a societal mindset. Like you said, they look different, and somehow, even in the back of your head, you're like, I don't want this person to be my neighbor.
I've
So,
actually asked this question to like about like 40, 50 cans so far, and I think that answer you just gave is actually one of the best ones right there. And that's a common thread, right? People realize that it's not something you can legislate, right? It's something that I already presented at the beginning. So we do have to create societal change and education and get people to really work together. So that's really all you can do, right? So that's an intelligent answer. All right. The last question for my partner, I'm going to ask something called right to repair. You've heard something called right to repair?
okay, not familiar with right to repair either. This is a good education for
Okay,
me today.
there's a guy named Louis Rossman. Actually, he moved from New York to Texas. It's quite sad. I think he had like over 1 million subscribers. He's pretty cool. He started his shop in the East Village, and what happens is that iPhones, right? You know that what they do now is, okay, let's suppose you crack your screen. You take it to the store, and sometimes they can change the glass on the front of your phone. Well, now what they do is they pair the screen to the actual phone device, so you can't fix it anymore. They don't want you fixing your own phone. They want you to buy a new one. This gets particularly grimy when people talk about data recovery, right? They drop their phone into the water, and then iPhone says, we can't fix it for you. And then the repair shop shows that they clearly can, right? But Apple, no matter how much the loss was to you, they want you to buy a new phone. And there's a business incentive. So right to repair is trying to protect people's rights to repair their own devices and make parts available and stuff like that.
All right. Well, I like that. And if you'd asked me that question, I'll say 10 years ago, I would have said, listen, it's clear that Apple's had this strategy with a lot of their products for a long time, where they don't want you to use foreign software. They want to control the entire environment, which also controls the money. So, but someone else should come along and build a better product, and then Apple will go away. But the reality is that they're not a monopoly, but they got such a hold on the market that it's almost like a monopolistic unfair advantage. So I would, my gut feel before I, looked at anything legal, but it would be like, I would like to support that, because you spend a heck of a lot of money on that phone, and then you're trapped. And that's it's not good. It's not good for the customer. But again, if we had a more kind of balanced marketplace where it was like, well, the hell with you, I'm just going to switch over to Android, or then there were 5 other companies that were out there, but the marketplace is so narrow and Apple has such a big share that yeah, I'd like to see some people not feel
There-
trapped like that.
There's
And
some fascinating documentaries on this topic, and just so you know how widespread it is, it's gone outside of just the Apple phones. It's actually crept into Biden himself had to like say that the military had the right to repair their vehicles because they were trapped inside of a lot of predatory contracts. If you go to McDonald's and you never can get the ice cream out, they also got trapped in a predatory contract for the ice cream machines. It cost them like $20,000 every time they want to fix their ice cream machine. The same thing's going on with the tractors, right, for the farmers, right? Before they had the old gas tractors, but now the gas tractors have a lot of things to manage how the blades go and stuff. And now the manufacturers are forcing the a new layer of costs onto farmers, and I think they're actually succeeded somewhat, right? So
Mhm.
it's more than just the iPhones. But appreciate your
Well,
go ahead.
this might cost me votes, but here's my phone. Just I don't know if you can see how cracked up my screen is.
Yeah,
I'm like, I get sick of that. So many times I felt like for a while my phone just always like die at 1 month and 1 year, 11 months, and 20 days. I felt like it was just constant
yeah.
money turnover since you don't get the free phones anymore. And so now I get sick of it. So this is kind of my protest. When people are like, "Why don't you get a new phone?" I'm like, "Screw them.
I
I'm keeping
understand.
this one until it dies."
That's probably the best idea. Yeah, for real. All right, so now let's go to some more of the broader topics, right, that people might be concerned about, right? You are on a federal level, so Congress will be able to make a federal decision. So let's talk about some of those. First of all, right now we see that there's a lot of concern going on about this potential. Putin says he might be using nukes, stuff like that. How do you feel about the whole war situation and foreign policy?
Yeah. Um, when you're, I mean, I don't know. Maybe some people would say, "Oh, you're 58, you're really old." But you get to a certain age and you look back and you say, "How the hell are we back in this situation?" I mean, this is not even close to what I lived through as a kid, or my older siblings did in the '60s. I'm more of a child of the '70s, but it was still like we always felt like it could be nuclear war at any time between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. There was always tension, and everyone was building nuclear weapons as fast as they possibly could, even though we already had enough to kill everyone 10 times over. Then we finally got to the point where it was like we had the great stand down. Essentially, we're never going to point our weapons at each other again. And I mean, I still feel like this is just a great big bluff from Putin because he's generally a bully, and he thinks he'll scare people into backing down. But it's awful for every human being on the planet that anyone even wants to have this conversation again. You would have hoped that we've lived through our nuclear era. I'm a Star Trek fan, and I remember there were a couple episodes where like Captain Kirk or Mr. Spock was like, "Yes, you survived your primitive nuclear war era," and maybe we haven't. So um, yeah, and I think that needs to be part of the calculation for any brinksmanship that we do. I don't have a problem saying, okay, the Ukrainians should support themselves, but I've been concerned all along about let's not get too involved. So we're clear, because if we're clearly an active combatant, then you get to a situation where, okay, the other side says, okay, we're going to hit some NATO facilities because you're supporting them. You've crossed the line, and then we answer back, and next thing you know, it's the machine takes off.
All right, so there's the foreign policy thing. Let's go back to some more domestic issues over here. So Um, before I get into all that, okay, criminal justice, right? We know that's a hot topic, right? We know last summer there's a whole Black Lives Matter stuff going off. Um, you know, we see so that like right in Far Rockaway, there's like a lot of crime going on, right, in the community, right? 7 deaths over the summer. There's definitely increasing. I was just by Ocean, I think Ocean Apartments. There's guns, there's bullet holes in the window. That was pretty wild. What's your take on criminal justice reform?
I think there are a lot of good ideas inside criminal justice reform. There are some really bad ideas, and there's been really bad execution. God bless.
Thank you.
So I think most people would agree that we leave way too much to the police, whether it's dealing with emotionally disturbed people or other failures in society where we failed our kids and now they're in trouble. And, the police officer's job is to stop crime or respond to crime, and they don't necessarily have the full skill set. And that's not upstream, it's at the end of the experience. Um, So I think there were fair arguments for saying, okay, we need to invest elsewhere to make sure, like I was saying earlier, make sure that that kid doesn't get in a situation where now he's got a gun in his hand and he's considering pulling the trigger because his life's, hopefully he's not going to kill someone, but his life is also screwed once he pulls the trigger. And if he's caught, he's a felon, probably not going to get a job. We know how it goes from there. But too much of what was done felt like it was punitive. It was okay, no, we save money and it has to come from the police budget.
Yeah.
So we need to have fewer police officers. Well, when you're already in a high crime situation, having fewer police officers isn't making people safer, and that's part of what's making things worse right now.
No,
So
maybe I could provide a little bit of just I'm sorry, I know we're interviewing you, but I just want to provide a little bit of my own.
okay.
Like I've been homeless and stuff like that, right? Just so you know. And
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is that people want to offset it to like these social workers or whatever, right? But who says that social workers know what they're doing either, or like that they're good or quality, right? The fact of the matter is that, right, there's even some, and in some cases when I've been on the streets, yeah, there's some bad cops out there, but there's also some excellent good ones. And the thing is that rather than just kicking off to another agency, right, I'd rather just make sure that the people who are in the job are able to do it well and correctly. And, I guess there's some truth to like, bringing the mental health workers and stuff like that. But then we have mental health workers who are incentivized through commercial reasons to increase their own, right? Yeah, oh, I think you need care. I think you need my care, and I think you need to bill for that. You know what I mean? Like it can get real problematic. So I would be, rather than just offsetting to another agency, expecting that agency to somehow be like a magic solution.
Mhm.
I would be much more skeptical of that, right? Just because it's in someone else's hands doesn't mean that they're gonna. You get what I'm saying? Doesn't mean they're gonna do a job.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, we introduced a whole new set of problems. And
Yeah.
one of my business clients was the Fairfax County Sheriff's Office. And I was talking to a major there about this very question a few years ago about reform. And he said, listen, there are some situations like my daughter was a social worker at the time. You don't want your daughter going in there by herself, but we're trying to figure out inside the Fairfax County's office, how do we integrate this? How do we do this together? We don't, because the solution isn't just flipping from one to the other. We need to find a way to integrate it. And I actually don't know what they've come up with because between the pandemic and that gentleman actually left the sheriff's office. But that was a good solution thinking that they were on, as opposed to it's this or that, because we do a lot of this or that in this country, and then we fail on both extremes.
That's an easy, right? That's an easy thing. This thing good, that thing bad, right? It's just, it's very simplistic. That doesn't address a lot of reality to the situation. So, oh well. All right, so let's move on to education, right? Now, the thing is that we see like there's an argument for charter schools, not charter schools. There's other things a lot of people talk about student debt. There's a lot of wide stuff going on in the education field. What are your take on the whole education perspective, and what's your solutions?
Okay, well, I can go on for a while on this one. Yeah, specifically with just starting with charter schools, I don't think they're a silver bullet, but in New York City, where I got a great public school education, and I grew up in it wasn't a time where it was like people are like, oh, rich neighborhoods, have resources, and that's why kids do better in some. That's true in other places in the country. New York City isn't like you're not funded by local taxes. That doesn't go into your local school. So in a working class and tough neighborhoods I grew up in, I got a great public school education, and too many kids don't get that today. You look at the statistics on how good they are in math and reading, and it's shocking, it's sad, and it undermines them for life. So we can't just keep this factory system going the way it is. So charter schools give us an opportunity to say, okay, here are some different approaches. And the same thing, my high school, Beach Channel High School, which doesn't exist as a single school anymore, used to be the equivalent of a magnet school before they came up with that term. So they had specialized programs in oceanography because we're down at the water. And it raised the level of education, brought in students from all over the city, which was also great for someone, kid like me, just to experience other kids from different neighborhoods, different cultures. But if we allow that kind of innovation and competition to happen, we're going to find ways to keep improving education. And some charter schools are going to be bad. Then you pull the charter on them. It's not like, PS 114, my school's been there forever. It's either good or bad. And if it's bad, you're stuck with it. So I think there needs to be more innovation. And it's really tough to make those changes because the national teachers unions have such sway in Washington. And Biden's coming up with rules that are going to make it hard to come up with more charter schools. And, we saw their influence during the whole pandemic. So it's really hard to make those changes. And we can't wait another generation to have this sorted out. So what I'd like to add to that is supplemental online programs that are available to every parent. So which would involve making sure, upgrading Wi-Fi. I'm not talking about like live, like we're doing this. That's a terrible way to teach kids. And I've taught live classes for like 20 years, and it's not for kids at all. It's barely for adults, frankly. But you can there are a lot of programs that are out there that could be really helpful. So if your son or daughter is having a hard time reading at 4 or 5, you want to make sure they don't fall behind. You can work with them at night, supplement what goes on in the classroom. The classroom is failing them in the 3rd and 4th grade when they're supposed to be getting problem solving skills and division and multiplication. Give the parents the tools to help their kids. I think we need to empower parents to make sure K to 12 works, because all this focus we've had in the last 20 years, particularly in the early 2000s, on college education, like as if that's the new high school diploma. You have to have a college education or you're never going to get anywhere. That was a disaster. If you don't have a K to 12 foundation, college is fairly useless. And so many people don't need to go to college. They want to be craftsmen. They want to get out in the workforce when they're 18. We need to give kids the skills they need. And, that wrong-headed focus on colleges and the policies that followed drove the price of tuition through the roof. Where we subsidize college, and then, then you go there, you got to bet you didn't get a sufficient education. After a year or two, you drop out. You got this huge debt because instead of the price staying still and your price coming down, college and universities, they're a huge business. They just drove up the price.
Absolutely. That's
And I
actually
work
a
with
huge thing. That's so few candidates actually talk about that. So many people just talk about the debt. They don't talk about the outrageous price of the colleges and how it's just that's absolutely a huge problem. And that's something that I've been trying to gather students around the nation to address, because so few people talk about it. Because the marketing, it's all about the market. Oh, you need this education. For what? I mean, why are you charging so much? It's criminal. You're absolutely right about that. Thank you for recognizing that.
Well, I work with colleges and universities around the country as part of my business, because we teach people how to solve problems. We don't just do it as a consulting basis. And so on the professional development side, but so we're in tune with conversations. And like for a long time, it was like, well, will anyone break $50,000 a year? That was like almost a taboo. And once I think maybe Yale did, it was like they all were like, boom, it was like they broke the glass ceiling and everyone got sucked up with it. Rutgers, the State University of Jersey, went from like in the teens to 32. And the prices just raced up. And and a lot of it was well-intended bad policy from the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I get that, yeah, too. That the federal government, kind of shot like steroids into the monster. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's take a look now. If we take a look at the economics, inflation. You said that's something that makes you unhappy with. There's all kinds of other weird stuff going on, right? Banks getting bailed out. What's your idea on the whole economic reform thing? It seems like there's a lot of control here. Crypto's crashing, right? What's going on? I'm sorry,
yeah,
everything.
I think, yeah, we got that's another monster we have to tackle, both in there's long term and then short term. And I got into this talking about the American dream for every American, because I want everyone to have a fair shot, and so I have a lot of ideas about that. But two things that make it really hard to think down the line are crime, which we talked about. It's hard to focus on the future if you're worried about your kids getting to school. Which, I've talked to a lot of parents in Queens where they like map out routes to get from the house to school so they avoid trouble. And the other one's inflation, because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you're working class, lower middle class, if you're working poor, it's just food coming out of your bag. Inflation, they said it's 8.2%, but it's 13% on food, and I still do grocery shopping. I've been in grocery stores my whole life. So, I see the pain and I, make decisions like, well,
Oh, wait, did you get muted?
yeah. Oh,
no, I lost you for a second. No, I can hear you now. Yeah, I thought I lost you for a second. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, the food prices, I mean, that's just so essential. Yeah, feeling for the restaurants, I mean, they're gonna have to raise the price. Oh my God. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy. So we're gonna have to see what happens. Yeah. Food's already getting
part of that, I mean, there's a lot of factors. And it's easy in politics to say, I'm just gonna blame the other guy. and I do blame both Biden and Meeks to a degree, because at least 3%, the experts say, of this inflation comes from reckless spending. As soon as Biden got in there, they just started spending money like crazy on things. Some of it was to pay off political allies, and some of it's just to keep buying votes. But they're buying votes by borrowing money from our unborn grandchildren. That debt's going to hang over them. So it's the long-term pain, and then there's the short-term of, you make people feel good when you send them checks, but then all of a sudden, when there's no supply, prices go through the roof. So we need to, as a longer-term policy, help get more supply locally. That means help more people start their own businesses, bring some manufacturing back, so we build things in this country. And I realize I'm not making one of those Trump kind of promises. Oh, we're going to start building cars here again and take it back from Japan. But there's so many things that we should be able to make here in this country, especially things of critical need during a pandemic, as we learned. We need to help. If we have more supply from the United States, or even from countries in other parts of America, instead of having this Asian supply chain where we're so dependent on China, I'd like to help the Central American countries, which they're suffering so badly. Their citizens walk 4,000 miles to our border. But I think a lot of helping entrepreneurs here and building supply chain here will drive prices down and give people jobs, and that's what people need. You need a good paying job to take care of your family.
What about environmental reforms? Being in Far Rockaway with the constant flooding, maybe that's something that's on your mind. I don't know. What's your take on the whole that right? People talking about green NYCHA. I don't know if you heard about that, the particular ideas. Uh, right.
Well,
Some of it problematic, some of it's
NYCHA,
cool. I don't know. What's your take?
well, I got a lot to say about NYCHA, but just in the couple of different things on the environment. I mean, obviously, we got our butts kicked during Sandy. I was literally in the Atlantic Ocean during Sandy, and it wasn't. I didn't have my bathing suit on. It wasn't for fun. So we got wiped out, and there's a lot of protections going in place, and they're considering more. Which listen, the Earth's getting hotter. Chances are sea is going to keep on rising. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we need to build that resiliency. In terms of trying to not have the earth get hotter, I think, and this would be excessively long conversation, but I think this whole Paris Accord thing, it doesn't work from either perspective. On one hand, it's, if we do everything and we're trying to do what the Bidens are doing, which they're focusing on the wrong things, and they're both killing the economy and not saving the earth. If we really need to do that to save the earth, we need to renegotiate and get China and India way more involved, because we can make our citizens suffer, but unless it's a bigger global effort, it's actually not going to make much of a difference in the impact.
How would you feel about like nuclear power plants? Do you feel like that's a solution? Is that something that
I
you don't
think
like?
it should. I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah, I believe in all of the above energy strategy, especially during a transition. So, we got away from nuclear energy because there were some incidents, especially back in the 70s, and but it's the cleanest form of energy, and France has been using nuclear energy very, very successfully for most of my life. So I think we should put that back into the mix.
I thought they banned all of them. I thought
Germany,
Germany, right? Yeah, yeah. Germany
no,
has it. France doesn't.
France still has it, and they're
Oh,
very
France does.
successful.
Oh,
Germany shot themselves in the foot
yeah. Germany's
by
shutting them down, but they still have
they're
some.
shutting them down, and now they don't have enough energy.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's, I mean, I love to have more wind and solar in some circumstances. We have an empty lot here that used to be, it's like one of those Superfund waste sites, so it's contaminated, and it's sitting right next to one of the big, I don't know, substations for the electric company here. I'm like, oh, well, heck, just put, it's a great area to put in solar panels and wind. Just plug it right in,
Okay.
but large scale, it's it's not working. I've got solar panels on my house too,
Okay.
but large scale, it's not working. And
yeah.
and so like, all right, let's get everyone in a really expensive electric car. I'd rather see people get hybrid cars. Let's take steps in this long. It's a tough transition, because just going again from one extreme to the other, we're going to fail and feel the pain. We just need to be more systemic, more holistic in our thinking.
Okay. You bring an interesting package to the table because you say that you're a political kind of like neophyte, right? And I can, I see some like some argument for that, but then you also are on the community board, and that means that you've worked with a lot of city agencies. That means you're also going to be somewhat connected and know some people around, if you know what I'm saying, right? Like you're gonna interface with the Department of Youth and City Services, blah blah, other things
Hmm.
like yeah, Department of Planning, things like that. So, um, interest. Now, as in terms of you're running on which you're running for the Republican on the Republican ticket.
I'll be on both Republican and conservative.
Oh, cool. Okay. So the thing is that when you a lot of times like we know that the one thing that I'm involved in right now, I don't know if you've heard of something called Rep My Block. Have you heard of this program over here, Rep
Yes,
My Block?
but remind me of it. I definitely did from when we first met
Okay.
each other.
So one of the things is that a lot of times the Democrats, right, they kind of control the electoral process because they're kind of like, in control. Not only that, but they also have control of not only they used to assign 1/3 of the people who are elected into office by using backdoor means, right? Because let's suppose that I'm a corrupt governor, you're my corrupt lieutenant governor. Now it's a year before I'm supposed to be reelected, right? But instead of I decide to drop out of office, instead of them running a primary, and then the people decide, right? The county committee decides that this person's going to walk into office through a special
Hmm.
election, right? And this is one way that actually 1/3 of all candidates are actually backdoored in this way. Not only that, but they also control the judges. And you look at the judges controlling, like, election law, right? Now, getting on the ballot, you had to get a certain number of signatures. For the Conservative Party, did that make you get more signatures, or how did that work?
Well, the Conservative Party, it was kind of funny. It was you had to get so few for them because they were even though they're still one of the four permanent parties in New York, there's so few conservatives left. You only needed a small percentage. For Democrat or Republican, you had to get 1,250. So naturally, I got 3,000 because, as expected, someone claimed that 2,000 of my signatures were fraudulent. So I had to go to court. Just silly BS. But
Yeah, these kind of games are going on, exactly, right? So, one of the things that we're trying to do is, right, take over local governments to try to fix, right, the electoral process system, stuff like that, from, prevent like BS, right? Like maybe taking your photo over 2000, making the process more clear. You have to get a freaking emblem and all this other dumb stuff. You know what I'm talking about, right? All the hoops you got to jump through, weird ass stuff. It should be more democratic and more accessible. Going through the process yourself, if you have any particular ideas for changing that particular front.
Um, I think there's many things that need to change because there's so many good people who would step up into public service,
Yeah,
but they
you
walk away.
look at Schumer. He's up for re-election. You don't even know about it. Grace Meng, who sits on the DNC, she's up for re-election. They're trying to keep it quiet, like there's no election going on. You know what I mean? They should be forced into debate somehow. You know what I mean? Like, is your opponent giving you a debate, or is he like willing to like engage with
But
you, or is he just trying to sit like quietly and like hoping nobody knows about this whole campaign's going on?
yeah, he was definitely playing the quiet strategy, and he runs full page ads every week, almost all the time, because
Yeah.
he's got a ton of money. But he was planning on sliding in there like he does every time. He turned down the local paper request for a debate, but now the NAACP has put it on their calendar for next Thursday, and I don't know if you could turn down the NAACP, but we'll find out. He'll either be there next Thursday or not. But yeah, Gregory Meeks,
We got
24
to
years
have a
of
discussion
Congress.
here. We got to have a battle of ideas. We got to have people allowed to prove themselves. They
Exactly.
can't just walk in. What is this garbage? You know what I mean? Yeah.
And you mentioned Schumer. He's running against a guy named Joe Pinion. People don't even know who he is for the most part. Not that I'm a household name, but Joe's running statewide office, and it's hard to get your name out there. And it's funny. Joe's like 39 years old, so he wasn't even born when Schumer got to Washington.
One idea that I'm trying to get across, maybe, right? Like how like if the stadium they can't fill a stadium, they can't show the game on TV, right?
Hmm.
So if these candidates, right, want to have their own, because they'll try to have a debate or presentation, right? But we should just ban them on TV unless they give people like yourself fair access to these debates and stuff. They try to pick and choose who they're working with. It creates
Yeah,
undemocratic solutions.
and that's why this is a real 180 for me. From when I was younger. That's why I'm in favor of term limits. Again, as a young, more naive person, I'm like, term limits. Every 2 years, we can vote for a new congressman. We've got the power of the people. But when the approval rating in Congress is 20%, but the reelection rate is 96%, it just shows you how many things are broken in the system where good people can't even get on the ballot. And then you face this huge money and infrastructure disadvantage. It's set up to keep the same people in power. And like you said, sometimes the party decides who's going to be the next person, and then they're in there, and
Yes.
that's one of the reasons small reason, but I think it'd be great if I can knock off Meeks, because I'm not looking for a career. There are some things I want to fix, and I just want to come home in 4 or 6 years.
Yeah.
But if I win, there'll be so many young Democrats they'll be lined up right out the door at the Board of Elections saying that they want to take me on in 2 years, because they're all going to think, a Republican can't win twice here. And those people will be stepping up, and whether, eventually one of them will win, whether they take me on, beat me at first or not, they won't be the handpicked successor. When Gregory Meeks finally decides he's had enough, the party will put up the guy he chooses. He's the head of the Queens Democratic Party, and people in Queens won't really have a choice, because it'll be, who knows if the Republicans will even put anyone up. 2 out of every 3 elections, they don't put anyone up for these congressional seats. So it's like, in some backroom deal, your next representative will be chosen.
Okay. One of the big things that people, when they hear the word Republican, right? And it sounds like you're people have these labels and they think they understand things, and not really. Okay, but we know there's a wide range of people who call themselves Republicans. Already, it sounds like you're pretty progressive in some ways, right? Now, one thing that people are concerned about when they hear the word Republican is they worry about their entitlements. What's going to happen if I'm on welfare, if I'm in public housing, right? So Social Security. What are your ideas on just entitlements in general, or
Well, a couple of things. One is, going back to my Band-Aid analogy, if you're bleeding, you need a Band-Aid. And certainly there are going to be people who will always need help because of some disability, but just other people who are otherwise healthy and could live a normal life, you still find yourself in situations where you need to, whether it's Medicaid, you need welfare payments, you need something to keep you going.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people will be relieved by that, and also your earlier answers about like criminal justice reform also provide more context for that. So it's pretty consistent. I appreciate that. Now, another thing that people say about Republicans, right? And I'm sure it's true for some of them. I'm sure it's true for some Democrats as well. I'm sure it's true for Green Party as well. I'm sure it's true for all. But Republicans have this kind of perception of being tied to corporate America and money and this kind of thing. Where do you stand on corporate reform through the electoral system and the whole relationship between that thing?
Well, fortunately, I'm a small businessman, so I don't have any corporate support or ties. I think that the system, when it comes to the influence of corporations and unions too, on elections, is really troubling. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I remember when Citizens United came down, and it felt to me like it said, okay, corporations or special interest groups or unions are essentially people, and they've got this financial freedom of speech, and their freedom of speech is way more than any of us, the actual citizens. So their influence, from whether it's issue advertising, which was supposedly what the case was about, but really it's about funding candidates, getting access to the people in power, and then driving the agenda. It's undemocratic, and we need to try to find ways to put guardrails back on this, because our
I think that's
voice
newsworthy in itself. Being a Republican who's running, who's actually has the right stand on Citizens United, really appreciate that, man. You know what I mean? I think that the Republicans are really starting to become more receptive towards messaging that is fighting against the corruption, and I really appreciate that, man. That's really cool. I'm glad you have come on the program today. What's your you have like a website, you have like social media. How can people follow what's going on with your campaign?
Okay. My website is www.paulking4congress.com. So it's spelled out FOR. From on the bottom of every page, there's the Facebook link and Instagram and Twitter, and there's also a comment box. And if you put a question or an idea, it'll take me a day or two, but I'll personally respond. I have a lot of good ideas, but I don't have all the ideas. And you can dig around there. I've got semi-specific plans on a lot of things, and it's embarrassing. There's probably some pages that said, "Oh, the rest of Paul's details on education will be there in July." Well, July came and went, and I'm finding, I spend so much time out in the community. I don't spend enough in front of the computer to write stuff down. But I just like we talked today, I'll gladly talk about anything and hear what people say, because
No, I'm planning on being in the space for decades. So the thing is that as candidates cycle through, I will continue to make, maybe you plan on running in 24 if that doesn't work out. I know it's a long shot for Republican, but we can continue to build that base. And, you're learning, right? Learning by doing. You're going through the system once, right? It's hard to paint the Mona Lisa with one stroke. You know what I
Right.
mean? So maybe it'll take a 2 or 3 times, maybe, right? But you're going to get stronger each path. Hey, maybe it could even happen this time, right? Um, Props out to man Jeff Young in Kentucky. I think he ran his 5th time and he finally won the primary. We'll have to see if he gets through it, right?
Hmm.
It's a good time to meet up. So now that people have your website, right? You said you're paulkingforcongress.com. You said,
Yes.
okay. Do you update on Twitter or Facebook, anything like that?
Yeah, we post on Facebook pretty regularly. Sometimes that gets copied over onto Instagram, and less frequently with Twitter, but I do Twitter.
Elections in November. You got any cool events coming up before then? Anything this week, next week, just before the election? What's up? I'm sure you need people on polling day. That's the most important day, right? The day of the election. Actually, wait, early voting, when does it start? Has it already started?
It's
It's real soon.
Well, the 29th is early voting,
Okay.
which is the 10-year anniversary of Sandy. I don't know if there's a meaning to that, but yeah, at this point, I'm just running. I'm just trying to meet as many people as possible, and I don't even have time to organize events. Down in Rockaway, there's going to be a couple of bars are doing a Freedom Fest, which was not actually related to the election. And I said, can you please turn that into a get out the vote? Because win, lose, or draw, I don't want this election decided by only 20% of the people voting. It's too important. There's too many things going on for people to sit back and say, oh, I can't change anything, because you can. But we all have to get in on it.
You might be a sleeper winner. The thing is that I worked on many campaigns, and I remember working for the Jamal Bowman campaign. The fact that he had worked with so many generations of people. Well, what is that? Okay. You've been working for a long time with a lot of families, right? With the kids, right? Yeah, and those kids have grown up and put their own children into your maybe baseball programs, things like that, right? And that generation of just building that trust in the community. It got Jamal Bowman a win. It might for you. Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah.
Hope
Yeah.
so.
All right. So, hey, man, thank you so much for coming on. Last thing I'm going to ask you is, we mentioned a lot of different topics today, right? Environment, economics, right? Corruption, stuff like that. Out of all the topics, which one is the one that you're most passionate about? Do you think is your specialty, or is there one?
I'm gonna actually, if you go like a politician, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to answer with something else. The one thing that we didn't talk about, but it's really bothered me, is NYCHA. Worst slumlord in New York City.
Oh, I like that. I'm actually heavy in the public housing community. I don't know if you know about my work in there, but go
I've
ahead.
seen I've seen it online, some of your videos. So, I've got, because I joined the community board, and I only joined the community board to meet other people in Rockaway. I know the community board has no real authority, but it's one thing to walk the walk and say, talk the talk and be like, oh, we're all in this together. But if I never get out of my bubble, then how are we in it together? So that's why I'm on the community board, to work with people in downtown Rockaway, Far Rockaway, Edgemere, Arverne, and we've got 5 NYCHA developments. And reading about it in the paper is one thing. Knowing that if you flush the toilet in some of the buildings in the Beach 41st Street projects, there's a fair chance it's coming out on the second floor. It's when you talk to people who live through that, and it's a totally different. It's not like reading it at all, and it's completely unacceptable, not just for the city, but for the feds. It's a federal program where there should be oversight. We need to get these people out of these situations. It's shocking that the only reason that we get away with it is because New York City's the landlord, not a slumlord.
You're absolutely right, man. Actually, I have a video coming out on Far Rockaway real soon. Actually, my friend Teresa Scott is staying in Far Rockaway. In the Redfern House. Is actually funny that you should mention that. We actually have video right outside of there. And maybe, I know Mike Zimblewski is actually another Republican who supports public housing, versus Nadler, who's supporting the corporate developments who are coming in. And he's also pissing off the Penn Station people, right? Because he's also gentrifying, actually he's ejecting like artists and stuff like that who live in the community for, to turn into like luxury high rises. Republican Party is really taking on the new level of reform, and it's actually quite exciting to trace that. So maybe we could have actually a sit down with you and other candidates, right, and other people from NYCHA, talk about this issue and to really drive it in the Democrat space. Would be hilarious. Carmen Quinones from Douglas Houses could be a great ally. Yo, this is a great interview, man. I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah.
I look forward to it in the future, man. I'll stay in touch, man. You're super interesting to me, and for my audience, I definitely tune into this guy. I think that really there's a lot of people who are starting to be like in this guy's framework, right? You have people that are going Republicans as a protest against the corruption and the BS that exists in the Democratic Party. And I'm not saying all Democrats are bad either,
Right.
but a lot of them are. Let's be. I'm sorry to say it. Yeah, not saying all the Republicans will leave it because they're not, right? But there's a good batch of them that are coming up that have a lot of right that are willing to stand like take the right position on Citizens United. That's really what we need to really make this change. So thank you so much, and I hope that the press coverage this is live, man. Okay, great job. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And folks, check me out. And if you vote for me, great. But win, lose, or draw, I'm not going anywhere.
That's right. I'll be here.